video chat with us.
You're
Um,
very welcome.
so I'm really excited to talk to you. I've had a little bit of background about my site and what's been going on. So
Tell me.
I've been blogging for about 2 years now, just real estate stuff, and just as a layman, just as a hobbyist, you could say.
Okay.
And I've been covering a lot of for sale by owner topics. Started writing a little bit about that and noticed just a ton of interest from people are hungry for information naturally
Right.
that are in that mode. And so I decided, hey, why don't I just try to reach out to experts starting with the state of Florida, because I happen to be living in Florida as well.
Okay.
Let's just start out. Let's reach out to experts and see what their take is on this process and how people can kind of get prepared and what they should sort of avoid and kind of just help them navigate this, because I think
Yeah.
there's just a whole lot of people out there that need a lot of help, and they really are kind of clueless on like what to do, and it's obviously a very complicated thing. So that was kind of the inspiration for me reaching out. And I guess the first way we can kind of kick it off is, what drew you to real estate, the business, originally? What was like sort of your motivation for getting into this?
Hmm. Well, back in 2001. I sold my first business. I was like 31 years old, and I I basically took off a year, and then I decided I would try my hand in as being a realtor. So I got my real estate license, and I started practicing. Wasn't really into it. Can't say I really enjoyed it. Found it. I liked real estate in general, but I didn't like the act of showing, buying, and listing properties and taking buyers out. I thought it was very kind of mundane. But through the course of my 2 years, I sat through closings, and I kind of was interested in that process, the title process, the orchestration of the actual closing.
Right.
And then one day I glanced at what they call a title commitment, which is the foundation of our work, which is the roadmap to a closing. And I kind of looked at it, and I was like, well, I think I know what that means. I think I know what that means. And I was like, wow, this looks really fun. Like, this looks like kind of a challenge. And I decided, actually, I woke up one day, decided to go get my title license without any experience. And then I was very fortunate to end up partnering with what still is my ex-husband, who was an attorney, and we ended up starting a title company. We saw an opportunity. We both felt that we would love the work. We love transaction work. And that was now, gosh, it'll be 14 years that we opened this company, but I was in the business 2 years before that. So basically, I ended up doing some marketing work for a title company, and then I started my own company. And I really, really love transaction work because it is about a 60-day process. And it's very much a business-to-business process. We're dealing with lenders. We're dealing with the buyers and sellers. We're dealing with realtors. So I find I really enjoyed orchestrating the closing. I loved protecting buyers from bad purchases. And I thought it was a really great line of work. It was a little more not working on weekends, which I kind of enjoyed. I thought it was a really elegant process, and I just loved it. So then we've been doing that for a very long time now. And that's what drew me to the work. So by way of being a realtor, I ended up in title. Yeah, and then our first 5 years were booming, and then we had the real estate collapse, and those were very tough 2 years. Especially, we didn't have income for 2 years. We had no paycheck for 2 years. So kind of all of our savings and earnings from the boom, we ended up kind of surviving on that. And then the economy rebounded, and we were able to continue our work. We considered shutting down a few times, and then every time we were about to do that, something happened, and we picked up a bunch of work. So that's how I ended up in title.
Okay, so that's an interesting path to that.
Yeah.
So I guess jumping right into the issues for sale by owner people, from your experience, are you seeing people who are coming to you with a lot of knowledge, or are you seeing people who are coming to you pretty much with no knowledge and need a lot of guidance?
Well, for certain, there's been a very large increase in for sale by owner transactions. When we began in this, there was very few. Now, I would say, like, just before we spoke, I had my probably second call of the day from a for sale by owner. I think the reason for this is pretty clear. It's that now they have avenues to promote their properties on Zillow and hundreds of other websites. And, saving 6% is a pretty honorable goal. Like, that makes a lot of sense. So between the ability to market their properties worldwide themselves on, Zillow. I can't even name half the sites, but they're able now to reach the world and buyers in a way that they could never do it before. It's a natural evolution of technology that they're now interested in saving 6%. I think this is going to greatly impact the future of the relationship with realtors, by the way. So now I get a call, 1 or 2 calls a day from people who have come to a meeting of the minds or want to just market their own properties. And, I will kind of dive right into it. Generally, I find we've worked with hundreds, if not, I can't even imagine how many, definitely hundreds of for sale by owners.
Wow.
We charge more for them because they're far more problematic.
Okay, so
right
off the bat.
They're far more problematic. And we're actually thinking about raising the price again. Because what ends up happening, for sale by owners, they have great intentions, and by all means, they should try to market their properties and stay at 6%, but they're generally unprepared for what they're about to do. Every now and then we'll stumble. I'll tell you out of the gate, the ones that are successful, that are generally smooth transactions, is when they have a tenant occupying the property for many years, and his landlord is interested in selling, and they strike a quick deal. We prepare the contract, or they prepare their own contract, and those are, in fact, I closed one yesterday. They're almost flawless. Like, in other words, they've already interacted with each other. They've come to a meeting of the minds. We might have to hammer out who's paying for what, but if they use a standard contract, it's usually very clear. Those go very smooth. All the other ones do not. All right, so what happens, I made some notes on what I thought was the biggest challenges that a for sale by owner will face. And you know what? There are challenges that are worth getting over because they're going to save tens and thousands of dollars, but they need to really think about this in advance. Number one, from a philosophical standpoint, they're on a marketing level, they're really unprepared to aggressively market their property the way a realtor would. And the time and the lack of bona fide offers is very frustrating for them. By the time they get to me, though, they're usually past that, or they're thinking, or they're actually way ahead of it, and they're just thinking about doing it for sale by owner. I will give a lot of credit because they'll call often and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Tell me what would have to happen. So, and I kind of give them the breakdown. We have a little diagram of the closing process, so at least they're aware of it. Then the next thing that there is a problem is they're often unprepared to either prepare or review an offer. Okay, so it's like, okay, you do an open house, you have somebody standing in front of you, we like it, we want to make an offer. Half of them have a blank contract ready that they got off the internet, big problem, because it might not be updated, it might not be recent, it might not be the right version for their use. The other half have not planned for that, and they're like, great, what do we do? So then they start scrambling. What do we do? How do we find? So that's usually where we'll find someone like us or an attorney, or our attorney or a title company to basically prepare the contract. We charge in advance for that. We used to do it for free, but since half the deals don't work out, we stopped doing that. So we charge like $100 up front, and we'll prepare the contract for them.
So you're noticing that half the deals for sale owners just don't work out.
Don't work out, yeah, because of improper vetting of the buyer and of the deal in general.
And
so it just
versus a normal
realtor deal,
which is like almost
our realtor deals, 95% of them close. Yeah, and it's because it's natural that they're doing something that realtors and ourselves do every single day, so it's easy, and it's not for sale by owners it's like if you put me to start making in Starbucks coffees, I wouldn't know what to do. I'd be the worst barista on earth, right?
Yeah.
Because I just don't have the experience. So I think that when they're presented with now a potential buyer, they usually freeze, and then they start scrambling to figure out what to do. And then they're often even unprepared to think. They haven't thought about, like, when do you want to close? What am I willing to accept? They've thought about price for sure. They've usually overthought their price, and they've usually overstated their accepting price. In other words, they may not have accurately researched the market, and then when they get an offer that may be realistic, they're like kind of insulted. So So the mechanics of reviewing and preparing an offer is definitely the biggest and first hurdle that they face. All right, so that's definitely a problem. Then let's say that they're presented an offer, because there are a lot of buyers either have a realtor or have already if they know it's a for sale by owner and the seller is unwilling to accept a realtor in the transaction to not even pay 3%, they'll go ahead and a buyer will get one off the internet and prepare an offer. Then the seller's really unprepared to kind of vet the offer, right? So that's kind of like the next thing that happens. So they'll get an offer, and then they'll call us saying, can you call them back and say we won't accept this? It's like, no. So this goes into what our role is, right? As a title company, we're there to ensure and protect the buyer for the value of the property. We have an attorney on staff. His role is not to negotiate for buyers and sellers unless he's engaged to do so through his law practice. So they don't understand that relationship. They think because they call a title company with an attorney that we're going to negotiate on their behalf. When you pay us a $750 settlement fee, that doesn't cover negotiating your contract. The attorney charges $350 an hour to negotiate your contract. So you might find yourself in 5 hours of negotiation already incurring a lot of money, right? So that's a very big misunderstanding, that they turn around and go, I got this offer. Number one, can you review it? We do provide a complimentary review for and we'll have a 15-minute discussion about it just to make sure. It's really a courtesy to make sure there's nothing there that our sellers should not be very aware of. So they will ask us to rebuttal and negotiate with their buyers, which we are not going to do because we haven't been hired to do that. And they tend to get pretty upset because they think that's the role of a title company. And that's not the role. Our role is to orchestrate the transaction and close it and insure it. We're basically an insurance agency. And so then they're faced with having to go back face-to-face or on the phone or via email to their buyer and start haggling over their terms. They don't really even understand. It's not that they don't understand, but it's hard to, every contract has like 8 things that a seller needs to look at. Who's my buyer? What's his credit worthiness? When does he want to close? How long does he need for financing? How long does he need for inspections? Is this an as-is contract? There's like all these variables that will impact their sale. And they're just not prepared to negotiate those items. Because what typically happens with realtors is there's a buffer. There's 2 buffers between buyers and sellers. There's 2 realtors between them. And the realtors are getting everybody, it's their job, and that's why they're 6% to get everyone to a meeting of the minds. And they create a buffer so it's not a personal interaction. It's very different. I feel that buyers and sellers, once they get their contract executed, even before that, they don't want to deal with each other. Once they've seen the house, they actually don't want to deal with each other. And we have to remind them, this is what a for sale by owner is. Then they tell us that we're providing bad service. It's like, no, this is not our job. And, we're actually thinking of coming up with a for sale by owner, like a surplus fee or some kind of other fee where, okay, if you want us to do this, it's going to be $5,000 because that's how bad it gets. It gets really intense, and then they don't want to interact with each other. And then we're sitting on potentially $3,000 or $4,000 of revenue, and we end up doing a lot more than we should on their transaction. So that's a big problem, is that they're actually not prepared to negotiate their own terms with each other direct.
Yeah, and I think just where I'm seeing a theme here too. I just got off another call. That there's first of all, people do not like confrontation. Okay?
No, and understood.
And so for anyone watching this after this has been recorded, we want to make sure that you understand that, first of all, you're going to have probably an emotional attachment to something you've been living in for years. It's going to make it very difficult even if you find a buyer, it's going to be very difficult for you guys to sort of come together. People do not want to have that confrontation, and something's going to come up. There's no such thing as, it seems to me that there's hardly such thing as a smooth or perfect. There's always something.
Right, even in a perfect transaction, it can be smooth. There's always issues. So then I'm going to go on to the next thing I think is very important. And I want to and just mention here, like, that you're paying 6% to basically avoid confrontation at many stages of this process. You're dealing with things, but you're dealing with them once removed, twice removed, so it makes it a lot easier. So that 6% is a high price to pay to avoid confrontation, but the general population seems to want to do it because that's how stressful it is for these guys, and it is stressful. And we try to do what we can, but in the end, we haven't been hired to interact and deal with with the actual terms of the contract. Okay. The next thing I want to say is the biggest challenge I think they face of all which already there's plenty of them, is they're unprepared to actually qualify and vet their buyers. All right, that's the number one challenge. We end up with the reason half the transactions cancel is not even because of all the problems I just mentioned, but because the buyers shouldn't have been buying to begin with. And the buyers' realtors spend a lot of time qualifying their buyers, because before they run them all around town for 50 hours, they've already done their legwork. Hey, where's your pre-qual? Let me speak to your lender. Hey, are these guys going to close? Are they in the market? Are they truly able to qualify for a house for $350,000? That realtor doesn't invest their time unless they know their buyer is good to go. So a seller, just lacking the experience, doesn't know all the right questions to ask, and quite frankly is embarrassed to call the lender for the buyer and say, hey, is your guy actually good to go before I sign a contract with him? And it's well within their right to do that.
Right.
And they don't even know that. So I'll tell them everything I'm telling you. Hey, call them before you sign this to make sure. And they'll be very appreciative once they make the call and they find out this is not going to happen. This is not a good buyer. So I think that's number one challenge. And then the ones that don't make that call find themselves 45 days into a transaction and the buyer doesn't qualify. And in some cases, the buyer goes AWOL, missing. They haven't collected a deposit half the time, which they should have. There's a lot of that goes on, that the buyer just backs out. And then I would say the second biggest problem overall is when issues arise, which they do almost always. Let's say the property doesn't appraise. Let's say there's an inspection issue. There's electrical work that's wrong. Let's say there's open permits. Let's say there's multiple code violations. Right there, they hit a roadblock. They hit a wall. Then they come to us and go, okay, well, I'm like, discuss it with your buyer. Or discuss it with your seller. And the seller's like, I don't know anything about those code violations. So then right away, they stop talking to each other. Yeah. They want us to resolve it. And a realtor will turn around and say, okay, we're going to give you a credit for code violations, or we're going to give you a credit for open permits. We're going to close the permits. Listing agents are extremely proactive in resolving issues for a seller. And that's where I think sellers don't recognize the value of that. I have seen we have right now for sale by owner. This is a good nightmare story. The buyer moved in rent-free back in December. For sale by owner, because during our process we discovered open permits for a roof. So they weren't just open permits, the roof was never tied down to the house, which in Florida is a violation of building code. The owner did his own roof. You can imagine a roof not tied down is a big problem in hurricane land. Yeah. So the seller, against our advice, let the buyer move in. And we told the buyer not to move in also, but she moved in anyways. $1 million purchase, large transaction. They found each other.
$1 million? And
yeah. And the roof. So now our buyer has been living there 6 months rent free, but she doesn't own the house. The seller is very slowly working his way toward resolution of the open permit. We think, we're not really sure. All right. She's gone through 3 rate increases in interest rate. Okay. And she's living rent free, but that money's been already erased in her interest rate increases. We've had quite a few increases since December. And we've completely stepped out, and we'll say, we'll let you know when the permits close, we're ready to close. But you guys have to work this out. And you can imagine that's not a good situation to be living in your seller's house who's not actively resolving his open permits. So that's an example of something that could have been avoided.
That's the worst thing I've ever heard.
We have a lot of those. We have quite a few.
People have gotten themselves into that.
Yeah, and we advise, but that's a pretty extreme case. But yeah, there's actually, you'd be surprised, and I'll close with that. I'll tell you that in a minute. But so let me go back to qualifying their buyers. There's a lot to qualify a buyer. I'm a title agent. I have an idea on how to qualify a buyer, but I'm not a realtor. I don't have probably even the sixth sense of it, even that realtors have. And that's something that's very difficult for sellers to know if their buyer is really the right buyer, because people will see an open house. Let's do it. Let's go under contract. They haven't really thought through their finances. It's a very common problem that they don't qualify. And then they find themselves 45 days into transaction. They're really irritated. They want to keep the deposit. But if the buyer had enough time and didn't qualify, they're not entitled to keep the deposit. So they don't quite understand the mechanics of that, how that works too. So generally, when a realtor goes under contract, most of their deals close because they know their buyer's already good for it. So And then and also was saying the troubleshooting of inspections, appraisals, defaulting on contracts, all the things that can go wrong, title searches, title liens, they're generally unprepared to deal with, and then we end up stepping in and trying to. I can't tell you that how I have spent on for us, because by the time we're invested, maybe as an office, 10, 15, 20 hours, I'm thinking like, I got to get this done. And it's downright painful. And I just recently had to double my price in the transaction to get it done, because I just said I can't spend any more time on this, So we end up doing the work of realtors, and it's definitely a problem. It's definitely a problem. So now I will tell you, there's a couple. The smoothest cases is when you have a tenant in possession,
right,
who is buying the property. Those generally go pretty smooth. They still stumble when they have some moments that they weren't prepared for, but they tend to be very motivated because they already are kind of living with each other. And there's an interest in everybody selling and buying, very strong interest. But most other for sale by owners just struggle immensely. So, and I think as this becomes more commonplace, there's going to be better tools for them. Right now, it's very ad hoc. It's very ad hoc.
People aren't willing to provide information. I think it's an information problem fundamentally in a lot of ways. I think. And
there's hundreds of documents. It's an information problem, and it's an experience problem as well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And it sounds like.
And some of them, another problem is some of them are over prepared, and then they start to like macro manage the whole transaction and micromanage everybody in it, and then they will come to me with their own title search, like a buyer for sale by owner buyer, saying you don't need to do it. I already did it. It's like that's a pretty common too. Really? Yeah, I already did the lien search. It's like, well, I'm sorry, I can't accept yours.
Right.
You're not certified to do this, and it's all. They have good intentions, but they're trying to micromanage the entire transaction and don't really know how to do that.
Wow. What percentage of your business would be people who are like hyper vigilant like that?
I would say about 20%.
Wow.
It's brutal.
So they're either like really have no clue, or there's people who are just
they're just over it. They're over the top. Yeah. And honestly, I can see them coming now a mile away, and I do charge more. I have to, because
That is fascinating to hear about how you literally, because they pose so many challenges, you have to adjust your price to account for all the extra work you're going to have to do.
Absolutely, yeah, because we are service oriented. I mean, we love our clients, and we do not want to be rude or be insensitive, but they're way more time consuming. That 20%, like double the time, and then we're having to explain things a lot more. And they're very intelligent. Generally, my for sale by owners are extremely intelligent, because they figured out that they can save $15,000, $20,000, $30,000.
Right.
And they feel competent enough to handle it, and these things do get closed, at least half of them. But because of that, they also sometimes think they know more than they do. So then we end up having to explain our work, and then they're trying to overmanage even their buyers and their buyers' lenders, and they're crossing lines as well. And then it creates friction with their buyers or the sellers. So then we know that it's gonna. Basically, I can almost assess the pain in advance and price it accordingly.
Okay, so you're talking to people, and you can pretty much tell based on their situation. You're gonna know kind of like where they're.
Yeah, well, my realtor deals, I know what to expect. I've got buffers myself. I've got other people managing my buyers and sellers successfully, so I know my set fee for that is fine. But when I deal with for sale by owners, we have to double it.
Okay, so that gives everyone an idea. You're undertaking a very a painstaking, potentially, process.
Very.
And I think also it's probably worth mentioning too that there are people that want to save on commissions can definitely do so and still get help. They can still hire a lawyer. They can still, get their house in the MLS for a flat fee. So there's a lot of things that people can do.
And I have a for sale owner right now, great family. We've done a bunch of transactions for them. And he's in his 45th day of marketing. And I've set him up before. We have already a relationship, and I know what to do. He doesn't sign anything without me looking at it. I don't charge him anything for that because I know I'm going to get his sale and his buy. And when they're willing to listen, it goes great. And if I look at a contract and say, you know what, like that doesn't make sense. A 90-day closing. Why? Well, that's just a specific reason. It's not once they've had a little bit of experience with it and they're willing to listen to the experts, they're great. Like now he's in his 45th. He's about 45 days into marketing. He and I have talked a lot. I probably spend more time than I should, but he's a great client. And I said, okay, it might be time now to put on MLS for 2.5%.
Right.
Yeah. And then so I tell them, if you don't have a bite in 45 days, something is off. Your price, marketing strategy, could be the economy, buyers. I have no idea. But then you need to put it out to the expansive market, and let somebody make 2.5%. And then if that doesn't work, that usually works right there. It's usually sold. When they put it to the general open market. Remember, the majority of people are still using realtors. I see that number dwindling over the next 5 years, like a lot. I can't even speculate how much down it's going to go, but I think that we're going to see a huge reduction in realtor services, and there's going to be a huge need for more customized services for sale by owners. There's been attempts to do this in the past, but every state is so different that there's been not one way to do it. Maybe LegalZoom has something, I'm not sure. But so they for sale by owner will typically start marketing, not get an offer, they rarely do. Then they'll escalate into like listing it at 2.5% or 3%, and then they'll escalate into full listing. Not always, but a lot of it depends on their market. Definitely the hotter the neighborhood and the property, the more chance that they will sell it on their own, even with mistakes and stumbling through it. When the buyer's very motivated, they'll deal with a lot.
Right. Yeah, including going to Craigslist and seeing what's out there. If there's a shortage.
Right, and a buyer will deal with a crazy for sale by owner seller if they're motivated.
Right. Yeah. So the market definitely dictates for sure success rates, I'm sure. I think sort of to sum this all up, go to people who can help you early and often. Know what you're getting into. It's a huge. Know what fees you're going to have to pay. Right? There's all kinds of fees associated with selling. Know what those are.
That's a great point, because they forget that they're going to pay deed tax, they're going to pay lien searches, they're going to pay title searches. Yeah, there's all other fees.
Yeah, and then they're all caught off. People get caught off guard on that, and then there's emotions that get thrown into it from that too. Well, maybe my buyer should, people, and then maybe I didn't charge enough or whatever on the price, and so.
Right. There's lots of that.
Yeah. Oh, I guess I didn't realize I was going to have all these fees. Well, yeah, there's a ton of, when you go to, there's a ton of fees, so know what they are. Talk to experts before you get into a contract. That's the general consensus I'm getting from people is just talk to the experts early and often, which is why we're talking to you guys.
Right. And I love reviewing contracts because I don't charge for it, because I don't want anybody damaged on either side. And, the attorney gets upset, but I'm just like, and we don't always get those transactions because they don't always work out, because I'll tell them, hey, this is not a good deal for you. And because we've been around so long and I feel like we've been so fortunate and always having business, it's like a kind of like a superstitious thing where I'm like, I keep on helping because I feel like they do need it. And, if I can prevent them from going into a bad situation with a contract, I'm happy to do so.
That's great. Well, hey, thank you for your time. I really appreciate
You're welcome.
If people want to, talk to you further about your services, how can people get in touch? What's your website, and what's like a good contact for you?
It's theclosingcompany.net. I'm gonna send you an email with everything, and I'll give you, and they can email me direct or call. So I'm gonna send you the best contact information, and I definitely want our website on there as well.
Okay, and so you've got, and you service South Florida, Miami area?
Service primarily, yeah. Okay, so we're licensed in all of Florida, but the bulk of our business is in Palm Beach, Dade, and Monroe County.
Okay, so people, if you're in those areas,
give her
a call. All right. Well, hey, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Great. That was great, Ryan. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.